I am not a learned man, nor do I speak as one who has traveled far or seen great wonders with his eyes. I was a porter, a doorkeeper, a man who spent his life opening and closing a simple door. Yet it was there, in that small place, that God taught me his deepest truths. He taught me that suffering is not a punishment to be feared, but a door through which his grace quietly enters. So I ask you to listen with a gentle heart. Do not rush this story. The march to Nagasaki was not merely a road of cruelty and chains. It was a path walked slowly, step by step, with Christ himself unseen yet very near. The world saw humiliation, pain, and defeat. Heaven saw obedience, love, and a sacrifice offered without resistance. God does not always reveal his mysteries in triumph or comfort. More often, he whispers them through loss, through cold ground beneath weary bodies, through the ache of feet that continue forward even when strength is gone. I learned this in my own life, standing at a door, receiving every visitor as Christ. These martyrs learned it on a road, receiving suffering as his will. Before we speak of chains and hills and crosses, we must understand this. Nothing that happened on that march was wasted. Every step was known, every tear was counted, and every moment of suffering became a prayer, offered quietly, faithfully, and with love. Before the chains touched their skin, there was silence. Not the silence of fear, but the quiet of ordinary days lived faithfully. These Christians were not heroes in the eyes of the world. They were fathers who worked the land, mothers who prepared meals, children who learned prayers before sleep. Their lives did not shine outwardly. They were hidden, like seeds beneath the soil. I have learned that God loves such hidden lives. He chooses them often. Long before suffering becomes visible, holiness is already at work. In small homes, behind closed doors, hands were folded in prayer. Names of Christ and Mary were spoken softly, sometimes only in whispers. Faith was not displayed, it was protected. It was lived quietly, patiently, and with great care. They did not wake each morning expecting martyrdom. They woke to labor, to hunger, to joy, to sorrow, just as we all do. Yet within these ordinary hours, something extraordinary was forming. Every act of faith, every refusal to abandon prayer, every moment of trust in God was shaping the heart for what was to come. Martyrdom does not begin with chains. It begins when a soul chooses God in the small things. I learned this at my door, greeting each visitor as Christ. They learned it in their homes, choosing fidelity when no one was watching. And so when the hour of trial arrived, their hearts were already trained. The road to Nagasaki began long before the first step was taken. The moment came without warning, as trials often do. Doors were opened not by friends but by force. Voices that once spoke in the market now carried authority and command. Hands reached out, not in greeting, but in seizure. In that instant, life as they knew it was taken from them. Fear entered the heart quickly. Confusion followed close behind. Questions rose, but answers did not come. Why now, Lord? Why this hour? I have stood at a door long enough to know that not every arrival brings peace. Some bring sorrow, and some take away what we love most. When control is removed, the soul is laid bare. There is no time to prepare, no moment to arrange one's courage. Obedience must be chosen at once, or not at all. I learned this when my life was stripped of comfort, when my family was taken from me, and I stood alone before God with nothing but trust. These Christians were given the same choice, to resist inwardly or to surrender outwardly. Their bodies were seized, but their wills were not forced. In that sudden loss of freedom, a deeper freedom appeared. They did not know where they would be led. They only knew whom they belonged to. Suffering often begins in confusion. God does not explain himself at the moment of trial. He asks only for trust. And in that trust, fragile and trembling though it may be, grace begins its quiet work. The chains were heavy, cold, and unyielding. They clamped around wrists and ankles, pressing into flesh already trembling with fear. Yet as I watched in spirit, I understood that the body may be bound, but the soul, the soul is free when it clings to Christ. These martyrs walked with chains, yet their hearts soared higher than any wall or prison. To the eyes of the world, they were captives. To heaven, they were witnesses. Every step they took was a silent prayer, every bowed head a sign of surrender that no man could touch. I have stood at my door, serving all who came with humility. and I have learned that the simplest acts, performed in obedience, unite a soul to God in ways that no suffering can sever. When the martyrs were displayed publicly, ridiculed, and pointed at by strangers, they smiled inwardly, for they knew a truth far greater than shame. Christ himself was present, unseen, walking beside them, carrying their burdens and lightening their hearts. Chains clattered, yet grace rang louder. I pray you hear this. Freedom is not measured by absence of restraint. A soul united to God walks free even when bound, strong even when weak, calm even when the world shouts. And in such binding, heaven's love becomes all the more visible, quietly shining through fear, pain, and trembling flesh. At last, the march began. The prisoners' feet met the rough earth with a hesitant rhythm, each step heavy with exhaustion, yet each step a quiet act of surrender. I remembered, as I watched them in spirit, the countless small duties I performed at my door, sweeping, opening, closing, greeting each visitor with reverence. No task seemed grand, yet each, when done for God, was holy. So too were these steps upon the road. Each footfall, though forced by men, became an offering. Each sigh of weariness became a yah-yah. Prayer. The sun beat down upon their backs, the wind tugged at their garments, and still their hearts whispered, "Lord, thy will be done." I've often thought that holiness is born not in grand gestures, but in faithful obedience to what is placed before us, whether a broom, a door, or a path of suffering. The road stretched endlessly, lined with watching eyes, some cruel, some curious, some tearful. Yet the marchers did not waver. Their hearts were set upon the unseen companion who walked with them, who bore their burdens more than the chains ever could. And I, poor and humble servant, learned once again that every step taken with love, whether on soft earth or harsh stone, is a path to God. The march had begun, but the true journey was within, where hearts united to Christ walked free, even as their bodies were led by others. The sun climbed and fell, and yet their journey continued. Feet blistered, bodies stiff with cold, and hunger gnawed like a quiet beast, yet their spirits remained steadfast. I thought upon these souls as one thinks upon a tender flower pressed between fingers, fragile to the touch, yet unyielding in its beauty. The body suffers, yes, but the soul, united to God, can endure far beyond what flesh believes possible. I have learned, in the simple days of my service, that grace often works in silence. A quiet patience, a whispered prayer, a small offering of oneself. These are the tools God uses to strengthen hearts unseen. The martyrs walked not with boastful courage, but with humble submission, allowing each step to be sanctified in secret. Some would look upon them and see only weakness, haggard faces, shivering limbs, worn clothing. But I tell you, the Lord's eyes see deeper than men ever can. Every groan, every ache, every trembling sigh was transformed into prayer, into love, into endurance. It was in their silence, in their stillness of spirit amidst suffering, that God's strength became visible. Let the heart learn this. Even when the body falters, even when the world trembles around us, faith carried quietly within can rise above all. The march continued, slow and painful, yet lit by the steadfast flame of divine grace. Among the weary adults, there were children, small, trembling, yet full of a light that none could dim. Their eyes, wide and innocent, reflected trust so pure that it seemed to pierce the very heaviness of the road. I watched them in spirit, and my heart ached, yet it was filled with awe. For God delights in humble souls, in hearts unspoiled by pride or fear, in the small and meek whom the world often overlooks. These children did not fully comprehend the cruelty that awaited them, and perhaps that was mercy. They walked hand in hand with elders, following the path laid before them, their faith quiet but unshakable. I remembered how I myself, in my ordinary life, learned to see Christ in every soul who came to my door. These children, too, walked as if each step was toward God himself, trusting without hesitation or doubt. The wind blew cold upon their faces, yet they did not falter. The eyes that might have reflected terror instead shone with a strange courage, a faith that required no explanation. They were not burdened by knowledge of pain. They were lifted by a trust that I have found is the purest prayer of all. O Lord, how great is your love, that even in the smallest hearts you place a courage so bright, so tender, and so holy. The march continued, and these little ones, innocent and devoted, bore witness to a faith that neither chains nor death could ever extinguish. The road was no longer empty. Villagers, soldiers, and curious eyes lined the path, some with scorn, some with pity, and a few with silent sorrow. Every step of the martyrs was observed, measured, and judged by men who could not know the secret strength within their hearts. I remembered my own years at the door, when countless eyes watched my simple work, some approving, some indifferent, some critical. Even in such small service, humility and faith were tested. How much greater the trial when all the world sees suffering laid bare. The mockery was cruel, but it could not touch the soul. Whispers and laughter of the crowd became wind passing over a river. It moved the surface, but the deep waters below remained still. The martyrs bowed their heads, whispered prayers, and carried each step with a quiet dignity that escaped the eyes of those who only saw flesh. I thought upon Christ himself, mocked along the road to his own cross. He too was watched, ridiculed, and misunderstood. In each gaze cast upon the marchers, I saw a reflection of that same suffering, and yet within their souls there was peace. They were not performing for men, but for God alone, and in that hidden obedience their strength grew silently with every footfall. O Lord, teach us to endure the gaze of the world, to walk in humility, and to remain faithful, even when all eyes are upon us. For it is in being seen yet undisturbed that true devotion shines. The city of Nagasaki grew closer with each weary step, and with it a mixture of fear and peace settled upon the marchers. The hills, once distant and unknown, now rose before them, and the air carried a heavy weight, as if the earth itself understood the sorrow that approached. I thought of death not as an enemy, but as a doorway, familiar, quiet, waiting for the faithful to enter with trust and humility. The martyrs walked with hearts open, though bodies ached and eyes grew heavy. Some glanced at the rising hill with hesitation, others with silent prayer, and all with a faith that shone brighter than the sun upon their backs. I remembered my own life at the door, how each visitor, each moment of duty, became a preparation for meeting God. So too had these faithful souls been prepared for this final journey, each step training them in obedience, trust, and surrender. Fear was present, as it always is when the unknown draws near. Yet, it did not dominate. Peace flowed quietly beneath it, a calm current that carried them forward. The closer they came to the hill, the more they understood that this path was not chosen by chance. It was sanctified by God, made holy by their faith, and imbued with grace. O Lord, grant us the courage to approach every doorway you set before us, whether of life or death, with the same quiet surrender and steadfast trust. For even as the hill looms near, your presence is nearer still. At last, the march came to its end. The hill of Nagasaki stood before them, silent yet solemn, a witness to every weary step, every whispered prayer, every hidden act of courage. Though their bodies had been broken and tested, their souls were unshaken. In the eyes of men, they might have seemed defeated, but before God they had already triumphed. This was a quiet victory, unseen by the proud and loud, yet eternal in its significance. I have lived a life tending a door, performing small, humble duties each day. It is there, in the ordinary, that martyrdom begins. Every act of obedience, every choice to serve with love, every prayer whispered in secret, carries the same holiness as the grandest sacrifice. These faithful ones, walking toward their final trial, reminded the world that true victory is not measured in power, recognition, or applause, but in fidelity to God. Their witness did not end with death. It continues in hearts stirred by their example, in prayers offered by those who remember, in faith that grows quietly, steadily, in places far from the eyes of men. The road to Nagasaki was long and sorrowful, yet in each step lay a lesson. That humility, obedience, and love are stronger than chains, firmer than fear, and brighter than any fleeting glory of the world. O Lord, Let our lives mirror this quiet victory, so that in all we do, however small or unseen, we walk ever closer to you.